Hello, everybody, once again. Today we are going to talk about something that we never talked about in this podcast, and is the Bartitsu. And we will talk about Bartitsu with the only book available on Amazon on Bartitsu. The author is Mr. Gary Dilwyn Owen. Nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you.
It's a pleasure to have you because usually, martial arts, when you talk about martial arts, we talk about Kung Fu, Karate,
Hmm.
Jiu-Jitsu, Judo. Now we are starting to talk about also many other martial arts from Southern East Asia,
Hmm.
like the Filipino and Indonesian that I play. But sometimes we listen to something like Irish, French, and the European martial arts, and also the Bartitsu.
Hmm.
So I would like you, first of all, to talk us about your background in martial arts. How did you start? And then how did you started interesting yourself in the Bartitsu?
Well, I started in martial arts a very long time ago. My very first lesson was in 1985, um, and it was in London. I wanted to learn. There was a program on television years ago called Way of the Warrior, and it went through all the different martial arts styles. And one of them that I noticed was called Wing Chun. And they said Wing Chun has only got three forms. It's very straightforward. It's very direct. And I thought, well, that's what I want to learn because I didn't think I'd be doing high kicks or backflips or anything too athletic. And Wing Chun looked like something I might be able to do. So I sort of researched it, and I met a chap who gave me a number of someone called Nino Bernardo. And Nino Bernardo ran a place in North London called The Basement. And what had happened, I went up and met him, and it turned out I didn't really appreciate how lucky I was at the time. But Nino Bernardo had just come over from London within the last 2 years, having studied the entire Wing Chun system with Wong Shun Leung. And people familiar with Wing Chun will know who Wong Shun Leung was. But if you're
Yeah.
not, I can give you a quick story, a quick history of who he is.
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay, well, the man who brought Wing Chun over to Hong Kong, really, into the world was Ip Man, or Yip Man as we used to call him, and Yip Man taught in Hong Kong, and one of his most famous students was Wong Shun Leung, and Wong Shun Leung became very famous from doing what they call Beimos, which were rooftop challenge matches with different styles. And Wong Shun Leung became known as Talking Hands Wong because, as far as I think he did lose one. I think he did lose one fight, but had a record, nearly 100% record, and became very, very notorious in Hong Kong for fighting. And he was an Ip Man student, and he became the senior Ip Man student, and he also changed the system a little bit. I think he the fight he lost was he got a bit of got a low blow, and because of that he changed the system and added something called a gansao, a low block. And while doing this, he altered the dummy form. There's a wooden dummy form as well. He modified the wooden dummy form, so he brought a bit of his own input into Wing Chun. But as I say, he was the senior student of Ip Man, and where he became even more famous was. Bruce Lee became a student of Ip Man. And as I understand it, Ip Man was very traditional, and the Chinese had some very traditional ideas. And Bruce Lee wasn't entirely Chinese. I believe he had American ancestors, and I think perhaps his father or his grandfather hadn't been Chinese. So there was a slight sort of cultural thing about that. They were very traditional at that time. So Ip Man, this is as I understand it, I may be wrong. Ip Man told Wong Shun Leung, "Will you teach him?" So Wong Shun Leung became Bruce Lee's teacher and taught him at home. And Wong Shun Leung used to tell stories of how Bruce Lee and other students would be training at his house, but Bruce Lee would get there early and stand at the top of the street and say, oh, he's not in today, he's not training today, and send the other students back home so that he could get a private lesson on his own. And Wong Shun Leung and Bruce Lee became very good friends, and Wong was his mentor. And he went to America with him, and there's films of him on YouTube on the set of Enter the Dragon, sparring with Bruce Lee, doing camera tests. And he was supposed to be one of the last person Bruce fought in the film Game of Death, which never got finished. But I can remember Wong saying he wasn't too happy with the thought of his one starring role in a film as he gets killed at the end, you know. So Nino, anyway, I digressed a bit. So Nino learned from Wong Shun Leung, who was quite a character, Wong. He used to smoke Camel cigarettes, and he used to like a drink, and he used to do a bit of gambling, you know, so he's quite a character. And I started learning Wing Chun from Nino, and he started inviting Wong Shun Leung over. So Wong would turn up at the basement and would give us seminars and teach us, you know. And of course, back in 1985, I didn't realize I was learning from Bruce Lee's teacher. You know, it was a great honor, really. I just wish I'd appreciated it a bit more at the time. So that was my first martial arts training. And I was probably trained with Nino probably 4 or 5 years. And in fact, 2 or 3 years ago, Nino's now in Ibiza. I went over to Ibiza and I spent 10 days training with him again. So I have kept up my relationship with Nino. And Nino then, he became quite famous, Nino, at the time, because he was the first student from Wong Shun Leung to appear probably in Europe or certainly in England. So he developed a bit of reputation, and he got invited over to America to train with Danny Inosanto. And so he went over and spent a couple of months training with Danny Inosanto in Eskrima and Kali. And when he came back, he was just full of it because he was half Filipino. So he loved Kali. So then we all started, learning Kali. Nino teaching us what he'd learned from Dan Inosanto. And so I spent about 5 years training with Nino in the basement. And then that was that, really. Then I went off and started doing other things and got involved in show business. And that was the end of that, really. So that was kind of how I started learning martial arts. So some very rudimentary eskrima from Nino and about 4 or 5 years of Wing Chun. But what was quite interesting, actually, I mean, I would say I was probably one of Nino's worst students, and I was certainly quite lazy. But many years later, I ended up in Hong Kong doing a comedy gig. I was working as a comedian, and I ended up in Victoria Park. And in Victoria Park in Hong Kong, there were all these kids dressed up in Kung Fu clothes, and they were all doing Kung Fu, and they had their Kung Fu teacher there. And I was watching them, and I started, one of the little kids that started chatting to one of the kids, and I went to the teacher and I started talking to the Kung Fu teacher in Victoria Park, and he couldn't speak English, so one of his students translated it, and I said, I learned off Nino Bernardo, I did Wing Chun. His style wasn't Wing Chun. I don't know what his style was, but anyway, I could see him looking at me, and eventually he said, oh, come on then. And I thought, all right then. So we started chi-soing, doing sticky hands together. And he was quite a small, very stocky guy. And it was quite because he just rushed straight at me. He was going to have me. And what I did, because I'm 6'3" and I've got very long arms, I just closed my center line. And I mean, all I could do was keep him out, really. I just kept him out, and he kept trying to get me. And it's like a bull at a gate. And I just kept closing my center line, keeping him off. I think I fell over once. And I did land a punch on him, and I apologized. And I was told later that was a mistake. You don't apologize because that means they're losing face if a Westerner's apologizing to. But, eventually he broke away and went, you're too strong. And what I took away from that was, even as a very poor student of Nino, who probably one of the worst in the class, I was taught by such a good teacher, and I was taught such good stuff, because even 10 years later, as a much older person, I could hold my own against a Kung Fu teacher in Hong Kong, So, I mean, I was very, very lucky to train with Nino. And Yeah, very grateful that I had such, because you look at Wing Chun now, and you see all these different things, and I'm quite critical of what I see, but I mean, I can honestly say what I was taught came from Wong Shun Leung, who was Yip Man's senior student, and what you see people teaching now, you think, oh well, I mean, I don't want to criticize anyone else. So I was just very lucky. I think I was very lucky to have a direct lineage and a really excellent teacher, and he's still teaching now in Ibiza.
Gary, it's strange that the Wong Shun Leung school developed a lot in United Kingdom and in France,
Right.
while the Leonting school especially went to Germany, Italy, Spain,
Yes.
Greece. So
Yes.
the dislocation of the two different schools, or also the others, but it's strange how some specific schools uh, took the leadership in some different
Yes.
countries.
Well, when I was talking to that kung fu teacher in Victoria Park, he mentioned Leung Ting and said, "Oh, the one we all know in Hong Kong is Leung Ting," because obviously Leung Ting was still in Hong Kong, and so he was the big name in Wing Chun in Hong Kong at that time. Was Leung Ting, and obviously Yip Man had died. Well, I don't know when he died. Probably the 70s, was it, or maybe earlier? He'd been dead a long time. But yeah, Leung Ting is certainly one of the most famous names.
Oh, yeah, also
Yeah, in
also
Hong Kong
commercially.
and in Germany as well.
Yeah. And how you went on training martial arts, and how did you meet the Bartitsu, and why also?
Well, after that, I mean, I didn't do martial arts for quite a long time. What I tried to do, I moved from London to Brighton, which is on the south coast, on the seaside, and I wanted to carry on learning Wing Chun. So I went to a series of Wing Chun teachers, and I well, it don't sound arrogant, but they weren't any good. I mean, there was one. I won't mention their name, but that what I saw, what he was teaching his pupils, I actually felt a bit angry, and I said, "I'll chiso with you," and he walked off. He didn't want to chiso with me. And another one I chisoed with, and I just had to be very careful I didn't hurt him. There was another guy. There were 3 or 4 different schools, and I basically sparred with all the teachers, and I didn't think any of them were any good. So it was very difficult for me to go to a Wing Chun school where I was being given substandard tuition. That was the truth of it. And this goes back to what I say. I was very, very lucky to train with Nino, because after Nino and Wong Shun Leung, it's very hard to find anyone who you can learn from. So I spent a few years trying to learn Wing Chun in Brighton, but I couldn't find anyone to teach me. So eventually I decided to do Tai Chi. And I found a guy called Brian Cooper. I mean, the first thing I wanted to decide with Tai Chi was what style I wanted to learn. And basically, there's Yang style, which has got quite wide stances and large movements. There's Chen style, which is possibly the most aggressive
Yeah,
or the most
yeah.
martial.
I trained some young style. I graduated at university in Chinese, and the wife of my teacher used to teach Tai Chi Chuan. So I
Right.
trained the 24, the 48, and the first form with Jian, Tai Chi
Oh,
Jian.
right. Yes, yes, yes.
It
Well,
was young
Yang
style.
style, yes, yeah. Well, I couldn't work out what style to learn really, and the thing is, by this stage, I was in my 40s. I'm getting older, so and I was looking at some of the Yang positions and stances are quite low and quite hard work for the knees. So
Yep.
I eventually decided to do Wu style, and I learned Wu style for probably well, I had 10 years of lessons from Brian Cooper, and Brian Cooper was a student of Bruce Frantzis, and Bruce Frantzis is quite a famous American teacher, and he learned in Shanghai. He's an interesting chap, Bruce Frantzis, because he's a lineage holder in Wu style. I think he's a lineage holder in Old Yang style. He used to be a karate champion. He's an all-round sort of martial artist, and he runs a company called Energy Arts, in America. And so my teacher, Brian, went over to America for several years and became a student of Bruce Frantzis, and then eventually became the European representative of Bruce Frantzis when he came back to England. So he was a very good practitioner, and I spent about 10 years learning from him, and then he retired, and then I spent about 3 years learning from his senior student, having private lessons. And now I just practice on my own, really. I don't really have lessons or go to any schools. I just do the form on my own. So that's what I keep doing. I still do a bit of Wing Chun. I've got a wooden dummy at home, so I still train on the wooden dummy. I do the forms, but I don't really attend any formal classes anymore. I'm 65 now, so I just do the Wu style form. And the sticks, of course, now, because what happened was we had the lockdown, the COVID lockdown, and I've been working as an entertainer, basically as a comedian or a puppeteer in the entertainment world, and basically I couldn't work. My job of entertaining became a criminal offence for 2 years, and it's the only job I had. So I had 2 years of where I couldn't do anything. And I got a very small amount of money from the government. I think it was £1,500 every 3 months. So, I had to sit at home spending my savings, and I had nothing to do. And for some reason, I'd always been interested in Tai Chi. I'd always been interested in the walking stick form or the sword form, but I'd never learned it. And Brian, my teacher, had it previously taught the walking stick form, but not to me. And he stopped teaching it by the time I was training with him. So for some reason, I got a little bit interested in learning self-defense with a walking stick. And I got in contact with a company in America called Cane Masters, and they do something called the American Cane System, and they make their own hickory canes and this sort of thing. So I bought a few canes off them, and I was sort of fumbling around working out what I wanted to do. And I spoke to the owner of Cane Masters on the phone, and I was just talking about particular canes. I said, well, I'd like a black one, bit like the sort of thing Sherlock Holmes would carry. And he said, oh, well, that would be Bartitsu then. And I'd never heard of Bartitsu at all, but the word stuck in my mind. So I immediately went online and started looking at Bartitsu. And then that was the beginning of a 2-year complete obsession, which resulted in me training every day, 6 hours a day, and eventually writing a book on it, because I just got so obsessed with it. It was I had nothing else. I couldn't leave the house, really. So I just this obsessive personality kicked in, and everything became Bartitsu, and I started practicing all the moves. I nearly took down most of my ceiling, destroyed my ceiling, twirling sticks above my head. And the thing about Bartitsu is it was actually created by a chap called Pierre Vinny for the Bartitsu school, which we can talk about. But he never wrote down his method. That was the problem. So the Bartitsu method that was taught in the school was never written down. And so I had to start researching what the method was, because I really wanted to learn it. And there was a book written in 1923 called The Walking Stick Method of Self-Defense by an officer of the Indian Police. And this was written by a man called Lang. And what had happened, Lang, this was about 20 years after Pierre Vinny had probably 10 years after he'd left the country. He learned the system from a pupil of Vinny's called Percy Rolt. And Percy Rolt, 10 years previously, had been a training partner with Pierre Vinny and had done exhibition bouts with him. And Percy Rolt taught stick fighting at a place called the Hove Gymnasium, which is in Hove, which is part of Brighton now, which is actually where I live. And it's now a synagogue, but it was a big gymnasium at the time. Hubert George Lang, H.G. Lang, went to the Hove Gymnasium and started learning the stick fighting from Percy Rolt. And then in 1923, he published a book called Walking Stick Method of Self-Defense, which was a combination of what he'd learned from Percy Rolt and something called Bois, B-O-I-S, which was a Caribbean stick fighting system he had also learned. And he was an Englishman who was chief of police in India. So he wrote this book, Walking Stick Method of Self-Defense, went back to India as the chief of police, and then taught all the Indian police this method of stick fighting. And in India, they have something called a lathi, which is like a very long stick. And they were all taught. So actually, they were all taught a version of the Vinny system from the Bartitsu club. And that's now, as far as I'm aware, the system they use for riot control in India with the long lathi sticks. It's actually learnt from Lang, who was the chief of police, who learned from Rolt, who was a training partner of Vinny, who was the teacher in the Bartitsu club, if that makes any sense. So the point is, I was trying to learn Bartitsu, and the only source really available was this book written by a policeman, an Indian policeman. There was a gentleman called Edward Barton Wright, and he was born in India in 1860, which was part of Britain then, well, part of the British Empire, I should say. So he was born, I think, Irish and Scottish parents in 1860. And he worked on mining concessions and travelled all around the world, Edward Barton Wright, for mining companies. And he ended up in Japan. And when he was in Japan, he started training in a jiu-jitsu school of Jigoro Kano, who was a very famous jiu-jitsu teacher at the time. Now, as an Englishman, he was fascinated by this. He became obsessed with jiu-jitsu. So about in 1890s, he came back to Britain, and he decided he wanted to bring this to Britain, jiu-jitsu. And his name was Barton Wright. So what he decided to do was to open a martial arts school in Victorian London. It was the end of the Victorian era. So it was in 1900, he opened the Bartitsu Club for martial arts in 67B Shaftesbury Avenue. So he opened the Bartitsu Club. And what he did, he brought over two Japanese. Now, it's called Bartitsu because his name was Barton Wright. So he used the first part of his name, Barton, and added Itsu on the end of it, because he was certainly a colourful character. He was a showman and arguably a bit of a charlatan in his later life, but he was certainly a colourful character. So Bartitsu was a bit of self-promotion there. So that's where that came from. So he opened the Bartitsu Club, and he brought over two Japanese judo teachers, Yuko Tani and Sadakezu Ueneshi. And he brought them over, and they were the very first Japanese emissaries of jiu-jitsu in Britain. And that would have been 1900. And so in the Bartitsu Club, he had two Japanese jiu-jitsu teachers. He had savate teachers from French. Savate is shoe kicking, so shoe fighting. Yeah. And he brought over a man called Pierre Vigny, or I think the name is correctly pronounced Vignuy, Pierre Vignuy from France to teach walking stick self-defense. And in 1901, he had a series of articles published in a magazine called Pearson's Magazine that showed him in a straw hat and Edwardian clothing with Pierre Vigny demonstrating walking stick self-defense. And so now Pierre Vigny is the teacher that was brought over to teach walking stick self-defense. Now, walking stick self-defense is just a small part of what was taught in the Bartitsu Club. As I say, they taught wrestling, they taught savate, they taught pugilism, which is a sort of British type of boxing, and they had two judo teachers or jiu-jitsu teachers from Japan. So it became a club for the rich and the middle class. It became very fashionable in its day to learn all these different martial arts. Now, the one I was particularly interested in was the walking stick method of Pierre Vigny. And that's the system that Pierre Vigny never really wrote down. However, as I said, he trained with Percy Rolt, who taught H.G. Lang, who wrote a book containing some of the system. So H.G. Lang's book was the basis of my research in what the Pierre Vinney system was. And I had to go to lots of other resources as well, including original magazines and original articles, to try and piece together the complete system, as far as I could tell, of Pierre Vinney. So what I did, I went through the system, and obviously I had to learn it. So I taught myself as I went the system, and that was probably over a year of learning it from scratch. I didn't know anything. And the system Pierre Vinney taught was a self-defense system that was designed to be learnt in only 12 lessons. So it's based on Canne, the French martial art of stick fighting, but it's simplified, and it's purely for self-defense. So there's nothing in it that isn't, a self-defense system. And Pierre Vinney.
What do you think about the influences between many stick art that were in the Britain? Because there was also James Fix, who's one of the fathers of English boxing or modern
Yeah.
boxing. He used to teach also stick and the backsword. And there is also the shillelagh. So there are many traditions with sticks in Britain
Yes.
that were influenced also by Lacan. So there is this melting pot of wooden weapon in Europe and Northern Europe. What do you think about it?
Well, there's, historically, there's one of the weapons that goes back. Well, actually, the stick is probably the very first weapon we ever had. It goes back back to cavemen. The stick. So it's the original weapon. The sword's based on the stick, really, there's different. For example, different lengths. There's something in British history called the quarterstaff, and the quarterstaff famously is what Little John defeated Robin Hood with on the bridge. It's quite a long staff. You operate it with two hands.
How long it is? That one, it's until here.
Well, that probably. I'm not an expert in it, but it would be generally taller than your body. So if you're 5.5 foot tall, it would probably be a bit taller than that. So generally, it extends above your head. So it's quite a long weapon, and it's a very powerful weapon because it multiplies force tremendously. Obviously, the longer the weapon, the more force you can get. So one of the problems with a Kali stick is it's actually quite short. So there is a limit. I saw some documentaries about that, and the amount of power you can get from a Kali stick is less than one you can get from a stick twice as long. It's just the laws of leverage. So there was the quarterstaff, which was a very historical weapon. And then, as you say, the shillelagh is an Irish weapon. And that was based on a time when Britain occupied Ireland and made weapons illegal. So the Irish people couldn't carry weapons. So what they did, they developed the shillelagh, which was kind of, on the surface of it, a walking stick, but became a whole martial arts system. And I've been very lucky to have had some lessons in the Doyle system, there's various different family systems. There's the Antrim system, there's the Doyle system, and the Doyle system is quite unique, actually. I actually had lessons off Bernard Leddy. I had lesson off, and Bernard Leddy is now what they call the chieftain of the clan. So he's the head man for the Doyle system, and his brother Daniel Leddy came and stayed with me for a weekend and gave me a weekend's tuition. But the basic strike with the shillelagh in the Doyle system is you hold it in this position here, and you have your thumbs along the back, which is in what we call saber grip. And then the initial blow is you send it out, and it bounces along your forearm. See if I can illustrate this. So along this area of the forearm, that acts as a brake. So and as the stick goes out there, it hits your forearm. so it doesn't overextend. So this hand is then used to break it as it comes back. And then this is so using your right hand. This would be the knob of the shillelagh. This would have the knob on the end. So in a sense, it's quite a light blow. It's not tremendously strong blow, but you've got the heavy knob on the end of it. And this will be aimed downwards at the knee or straight at the face. And then the more powerful blow is when you take off. So it's like right hand, left. I move back a bit, boom, boom, bang. And for this hand goes behind your ear, the hips, the body twists. So boom, boom, bang, bang. And that's the very basic style of the Doyle style. Whereas the Antrim style, well, I shouldn't really speak about the Antrim style because I don't know anything about it, but they hold the stick like that, so that your elbow is protected. Whereas the Doyle is this position here, and you fire it out like that.
Usually, a friend of mine last week sent me a stick, a walking stick. Maybe I don't know if we can call it shillelagh. I will show you.
Shillelagh. Yes.
It's this one. I cut a piece because it was too long and too curved, so I cut this piece here so that I can handle with two hands and also one. It's really, really heavy here, but I saw that sometimes they used to curve down here, put some lead inside, some liquid lead, and then put the wood once again here and chisel again, so to have it looks like my head, but but it's stuff like that. So inside the knob, there is the some lead.
Yes, it's called lead loaded. And if you go online, there's there's a place called Old Shillelagh, which is actually in Shillelagh. Actually, because Shillelagh comes, the reason it's called Shillelagh is because there's a town in Ireland called Shillelagh. That's where it comes from. And they were used in something called faction fights. And faction fights were just family feuds, really. There'd be in Ireland back in the day. I suppose this would have been the 1790s, 1800s. There'd be family feuds and family arguments, and they'd all they'd sort of meet at a fair and hit the hell out of each other with these sticks. And they used to put straw in their hats to try and protect their head from injury. But they were brutal affairs. I mean, they really horrible business, you know. And they're traditionally made of a wood called blackthorn, which is a very hard wood. And they leave the spikes on. So from this position here, if you imagine my stick's got lots of spikes, you might do a bar smash like that, and then you drag it down so that the spikes would rip this. So, and also there'd be two areas where there weren't any spikes where you could hold. And there's a move called jumping the stick, where if you wanted to do a side block like that, so you wanted to block like that, or you want to block like that, it's called jumping the stick. What your hands do is you let go and grab. You jump because you've got spines and spikes all over here, so you can't slide your hands. So what you have to do is, it's called jump. You let go and grab. So you have to do that to avoid the spines, because these spikes were actually used as part of the weapon. Because blackthorn is well, as the name suggests, got thorns all the way down it. So they just knock the end off the thorn, sand it down a bit, but be very pointed. And the one you've got is a short one. It's more of a club. But otherwise, the walking stick type shillelaghs are supposed to stop at the level of your hip. So they're the length. They're the length of your leg, really.
This one was like that, but I cut at least.
Right.
I cut this piece here because it was too curved, so the balance was out of reach. It was really strange to handle, so I prefer to. I thought about I cut it here, but it was too short, so I
Yes.
decided to keep it. Also, this one,
Yes.
and it's half a kilograms,
Yes.
more than
Well,
a
I
kilogram.
think the English that would be called a bludgeon. Really, it's yeah, more of a short, club type thing
Yeah,
rather than a walking stick.
and I would like to let's talk about your book.
Yes.
I'd like to know how you started collecting all the material for the book, and how did you structure your book and organize the chapters and everything.
Right. Well, the main source was because it was Pierre Vinney, that the actual style Pierre Vinney. Uh, he was born in 1866, and he served in the French army, actually in the artillery, and he became a maître des armes. He became a master of arms in the army, and then after that he went off and taught boxing, and in Geneva, and fencing. He also taught fencing in a place called Evian de Bain. And so he was very experienced in all sorts of martial arts. So when he came to London to the Bartitsu Club, what he created really his own system. And Barton Wright made the point that what was revolutionary really about his system was that most stick fighting or walking stick systems were kind of based on saber or on something called single stick, which is a kind of sword fencing with a stick. But the problem you have with all of these defense methods is that with a saber, you've got a hand guard. Your hand is guarded, which
Yeah,
means if someone goes to attack your right side here and you block like that and they strike you there, that's great if you've got a hand guard. But if you haven't got a hand guard, it's called a slip strike. A slip strike. A slip cut, I should say. Their sword will slide down, or their stick will slide down and hit your hand. This is the problem. The problem with stick fighting is, as if you've done Kali, defanging the snake. Your best method of defense is to hit their hand that's holding the weapon.
yeah,
That's like a basic. And the problem with stick fighting is there's nothing protecting your hand. And all the previous systems had been based on things like saber, which had hand protection. So there was a big gaping hole in the system. And Barton Wright wrote an article and said, after 12 years of research, Pierre Vinney has created a system which solves this problem. And the way Pierre Vinney solved the problem was by using a completely different guard system. He used a system called the hanging guard, and I'll demonstrate that if I can. Let's see if we can see. The hanging guard means your stick. Are you getting that in like that? Yeah?
yeah,
Now, the point about this is my head is covered. So if anyone goes to hit my head, the head is covered. But the stick slopes down and the hand is at the top. This means when you defend yourself, the tendency will be for their stick to slide down. If you start blocking with a stick like this, when they strike you, it will slide down and hit your hand. If you're up like this, then not only can they not reach your hand and your head is covered, but when they hit your stick, their stick will slide down. And in fencing, this is called the hanging guard. So what Pierre
yeah.
Vinney did.
I think this movement is the name of this movement, Illustrissimo Kali, is Estrella.
Right, right. You have that move in Kali, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, because I remember when I learnt with Nino, I was learning. I mean, I didn't learn much Kali, but what I did learn was target the hand. And the Vinny system gets the hand well out of the way, so they can't really get it. Now, if your opponent is standing like that, with their hand out in front of their body, it's very, very vulnerable. If you're up like this, they can't really get to your hand, whereas you can very, very easily get to them. So that was
yeah.
the basis.
Also because you are charging the stick to hit again from there.
Yes,
You are
yes,
not charging here.
that's right. having your hand there is like offering it as a present, really.
Yeah.
Having it here, and also if you get the feeling your hand is being targeted, this comes straight back. You pull it back. This hand has to be out of the way at all times. So that was, I suppose, that was the genius of the Vinny system. Really, is it suddenly made walking stick self-defense practical. And of course, what you've got to remember is in Victorian and Edwardian England, all the gentlemen carried walking sticks. So these days, you know, if you're thinking of getting, the chances of getting into a fight with someone with a walking stick are pretty slim. I mean, I carry a walking stick every day now, and I'm old enough to make it look all right, you know. But if I was 20, I think you know.
I thought to get out at night and
Well, yes,
hanging out with one of these, but I think it's better not. But I have some walking sticks.
Well, the thing is, you know, in Britain, we're very, very strict on offensive weapons, and anything a policeman doesn't like can be an offensive weapon. But a walking stick is about the last thing you can carry that, you know, you can defend yourself with, really. So now, it just seemed a bit silly after writing the book and spending years practicing self-defense with the walking stick, you know, to leave my walking stick at home seemed like a bad idea, really. So I'm not intending to defend myself or attack anyone, but I'd like to have it with.
If you didn't write a book, you could carry that. But now, if something happens and the police stops you, you wrote a book, so it's not a walking stick for you.
Yes, yeah, you're absolutely right there. I've got no defence. Well, I have to. Hopefully, they won't recognise me from the book, because in the book I'm dressed in a straw hat with a Edwardian waistcoat and a silk tie. So hopefully they won't recognise. But no, you are right. Yes, absolutely. And this is the other thing, of course, is the type of walking stick you carry will reflect badly. Now, the ones what Pierre Vinny used, in fact, Pierre Vinny after what happened, the Bartitsu club only lasted about 3 years, and I think the fees were very high, and unfortunately, I think Barton Wright fell out with his teachers. In fact, I think he even got into a fight with one of the judo teachers, as I remember. So it all collapsed. It only lasted 3 years, and Pierre Vinny went off and developed his own school, a self-defense school in Berners Street, 18 Berners Street in London, W1. And funnily enough, his wife, Marguerite, she also was a fencing teacher, and she developed martial arts with the parasol. And she taught self-defense to women with parasols, and under the name Miss Sanderson.
You mean umbrella? The umbrella is like
the sort of umbrella that you use for the sun.
Yeah, small.
A sun umbrella. Although I think an umbrella as well. Yes, I think parasols were what ladies carried at the time. But an umbrella, yeah, basically an umbrella. And she called herself Miss Sanderson. And she's, as if I recall correctly, was ended up teaching the suffragettes. And the suffragettes were a group of women who were protesting for women's votes, the rights to vote for women. So there was a big protest at the time because women couldn't vote, and they were locking themselves to railings. One of them walked out in front of the horses at the Grand National and got killed. I think the King's horse trampled her. So it was a huge social movement called the suffragettes, rights for women, votes for women. And there was something called suffragetsu, which was the martial arts. The women learned to defend themselves against the police and things. And Miss Sanderson became famous as the woman who taught the suffragettes how to defend themselves with umbrellas. So
suffragette, yeah.
Pierre Vinny's wife became very, 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 very famous in her own right under a false name. But where was it? Yeah, so Pierre Vinny developed his own stick called the Vinny self-defense stick. And his philosophy was not to have a heavy stick, a bit like what you've got there, but to have one made of malacca, which is actually malacca is the same as what they make Kali sticks out of. It's rattan. It's a sort of a fibrous root. It's a type of rattan. So the stick would be made of rattan, and then on the end would be riveted a small silver ball. it would be a tapered stick. So it looked like a gentleman's walking stick, but with a little silver ball on the end. And that meant it was very, very light and had a whipping effect.
Mhm.
But the silver
I
ball on
want
the
to
end.
show you. I want to show you another stick, and you
Yes.
tell me if it's one of these.
Yes.
This is like rattan,
Right.
but it has this at the end.
Yes. I mean that would be a perfect Vinny stick. Yes. I mean Vinny had a silver. I mean, I've never seen a Vinny stick apart from pictures, but that would be perfect because that ball would be what did the damage, but the rattan makes it fairly light.
Yeah.
And what he also did at the end of the stick, you don't hold the stick at the end; you hold it about a third of the way up, like that, so that you've got a bit of a counterweight. Because the main thing is speed, and yeah, so he produced his own sticks called the Vinny self-defense stick, and his system was based on something called the Moulinaise, which I don't know if you know what a Moulinet is. I think
No.
in Kali it's called, if I'm right, a redondo. That's
Ah.
circular.
Can you repeat the muli?
Yeah, Moulinet, Moulinet. And
Okay,
this is
okay. We say in Italian we say mulinello. It's a
Moulinello, right?
circular
Yes,
motion. Yeah.
yes, that's right. So Vinny's system, I mean, I suppose there's two parts to it really. Is the Moulinaise, and the Moulinaise are these circular spinning movements.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
horizontal, vertical. There's figure eight. Well, shall I demonstrate one? If you can see it,
Yep.
I don't know if you can see this, but yeah, can you see that? Let's see if we get in there. So you start off with a high guard. This is why I was destroying the ceiling at home when I started learning this. So a moulinet is that movement.
Yeah. Yeah.
And eventually the stick gets faster and faster and faster. That's the vertical. Then there's the horizontal.
Yeah.
And then there's the figure eight. And so all of these are different. Then you can do it on that side of the body.
Yeah.
These
Someone
balls,
in the Filipino Kali, there's someone calls it patuyok or the redondos or
redondo, yeah.
there is also another name, patuyok, redondo, florete. Sometimes it depends on the places in Philippines.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's called Kali, a screamer. There's lots of different names for it, isn't it? But we used to call it a redondo when we, when Nino taught it. But it's basically a redondo, basically, yeah.
Mhm.
So you've got vertical now, and what you do is it ends up looking a bit like the nunchuckers in a way because you mix all your redondos. There's a picture of Pierre Vinny, a cartoon of him, and he's just got a force field of sticks around him. And one commentator said when he spun it round, the silver tip looked like a halo. It's just this silver circle around him. And he was a master.
I was talking with a student last week, and we were talking about that. He started a few months ago with stick because he's really interested in weapon, and so I was explaining that when you handle the weapon, the stick is rigid.
Yes.
But it must look like a belt or a rope.
Fluid. It looks fluid. Yeah.
It must become alive because of the movement of your shoulder, your wrist, and your elbow. So it must look like something really
Flexible,
soft, but
yes.
it's not.
Yes, 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 yes. Well, Pierre Vinny said in one of his famous quotes, he talks about the circular movements and says, someone struck by a stick after the circular movement will not want to return to the fight again. So, I mean, the power, that metal ball hitting you at full speed on the kneecap, that would be the end of that.
Yeah.
And he used to, when he was in Paris, that in Paris, the big paranoia was something called les Epaches. And les Epaches were gangs of roaming ruffians and villains who used to hold up the middle classes and rob them at knife point. And so self-defense became a big thing. And in fact, le Canne, the French stick fighting, is really a response to that fear of gangs of marauding robbers, laissez-passer. So the Canne developed as a self-defense system. And similarly in London, and even actually at the same time in South America, in Buenos Aires, there was another system being developed by a man called Arturo Bonifant. And Arturo Bonifant, in response to the fears of the robbers, Le Portata, they were called over there, I think, Le Porta. He developed a whole system based on the reverse grip. And his system would be the basic guard would be to stand. Let's pretend that's the silver knob on my cane. Would be to stand like that. So this is your basic guard, and your first strike would be a butt strike.
Yeah.
Like that. Or from that position, you could do a butt strike and a jab, or you could do a jab across to a butt strike, two-handed butt strike. But the cuts or the swinging blows were all done from this reverse, what called the reverse grip. So he would strike like that, or like that. He would never, under any circumstances, hold the cane like that. Everything was done in reverse grip. So you can do moulinets to practice from the reverse grip. And it's not an instinctive way of holding the cane, but it's very non-threatening. And from this position back, it's a very surprising attack. No one's expecting it. Or it's unexpected. So, and that was, he published his book in 1930 in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. His name was Bonifant. So all over France, London, Europe, there was this obsession with self-defense for the middle classes, really, and the rich, from being robbed in the streets. So that was really where Le Canne came from. So that was the background to Vinny's style. And when he came to London, he started teaching it in the Bartitsu Club, as I say. And he taught it for about 3 years, but then he fell out with Barton Wright as well, and ended up with his own school in Berners Street. But what made Bartitsu quite interesting, and it's made it very popular with the steampunks. We have these, I don't know if you have steampunks, they're people who, look like Victorian, a combination of science fiction and Victorian England, top hats and
cyberpunk. And
but yes, it's a combination of Jules Verne and science fiction, and it's that sort of thing. Well, what happened was, presumably we've all heard of Sherlock Holmes, the famous detective with the pipe and the deerstalker hat. Well, Sherlock Holmes was written by Arthur Conan Doyle, and Arthur Conan Doyle had pretensions. He's a great writer, but he wanted to be like a serious historical novelist. That's what he wanted. He saw himself as this serious writer, and he created for magazines this character Sherlock Holmes, which became incredibly popular. And in the end, it became the bane of his life. That I've got to write another Sherlock Holmes story. He wasn't very keen on it because he thought he should be doing something a bit more serious. So he kept churning out these Sherlock Holmes stories to great popular acclaim, and a lot of money he made out. He's probably the most famous detective in the history of the world,
Yeah.
But eventually he got a bit sick of it, and he decided, he wrote a story called The Final Problem. And in The Final Problem, Sherlock Holmes is going to die. And on holiday, he'd been, it's in Switzerland, I think, the Reichenbach Falls. And he thought, right, that's where I'm going to kill him off. So Sherlock Holmes ends up with his arch enemy, Moriarty, and they're wrestling on the Reichenbach Falls. And eventually they both fall off. And in fact, I can tell you what, because I mentioned this in my book, I can read you.
Sure.
I can read you the bit that he wrote about it. Here we go. This is what he wrote. Any attempt at recovering the bodies was absolutely hopeless. And there, deep down in that dreadful cauldron of swirling water and seething foam, will lie for all time the most dangerous criminal and the foremost champion of the law of their generations. So that was it. That's how he killed off Sherlock Holmes. But the problem was the British public weren't going to have it. They weren't going to have Sherlock Holmes killed off. So he started getting flooded with letters, and I won't repeat some of them, but I remember reading some of them, and they were absolutely abusive. They were, I won't repeat the words, but they were very, very rude letters. So you can't kill off Sherlock Holmes. So this went on for a few years, and I think his money started drying up a little bit. So he's decided he had to resurrect Sherlock
Yeah,
Holmes.
someone's gotta pay the bills.
Has to pay the bills, and Sherlock's the man to do it. So he wrote a series of stories called The Return of Sherlock Holmes, and they were
Yeah,
published,
sure.
I think, published in a magazine again. And the first one was called The Adventures of the Empty House. And in The Adventures of the Empty House, Arthur Conan Doyle had to come up with how Sherlock Holmes hadn't ended up in the swirling waters with his archenemy Moriarty, how their fall to the doom had been averted. So what he came up with, he said, Sherlock Holmes had thrown Moriarty over the side because he was an expert in Bartitsu, that Japanese form of wrestling. And what was interesting, he misspelt the word. Instead of Bartitsu, he spelt it Baritsu. And no one's quite sure why that happened. But at the time, a few months before, the Times newspaper had done an article on Bartitsu, and they'd misspelt it as Baritsu. So it could be, this was in 1903, just as the Bartitsu school was closing, actually, ironically. It could be that he copied it from the Times newspaper, or it could be he just made a mistake, or it could even be that he didn't want to get sued by Edward Barton Wright for using his name. So we never quite know why he misspelt it. But Baritsu, that Japanese form of wrestling, was obviously Bartitsu. So what this then meant was Sherlock Holmes, and this is really, to be honest with you, what made Bartitsu, what makes Bartitsu famous, is that it's the martial art of Sherlock Holmes, you see. And so now Bartitsu's developed a life of its own. Possibly it would have faded into obscurity, but because of the Sherlock Holmes connection, it survived. And now there's a big resurgence in Bartitsu. And if you go online, there's people teaching, the things they would have taught, which would be jujitsu, pugilism, old-fashioned boxing style. And actually, I'm very proud to say my book on walking stick self-defense, Bartitsu, has actually taken off, and there are now study groups in America and Canada where they're all training because I have recreated the style.
Gary, what kind of book is yours? You have also some photos to explain and
Yes,
to show
yes. Let me
some
show you.
technique, or is just
Oh, no,
historical?
no. What it is, when I wrote it, I decided if it wasn't an instruction, it wasn't going in the book. So this book is a manual on how to do it. And that's the cover. So I will show you as we go through. There's a little bit about, well, there you go. Now that's Pierre
Okay.
Vigneau, or Père Vinny. And as you can see, that's his cane with the
Yeah.
little silver ball on the end, and with his rather splendid Edwardian moustache. So I'll read you the chapters, the introduction, the stick, the grip, the exercises, the guards, the cuts, the footwork, the targets, the ripostes, then part 2, clearing cuts, flicks and flips, using 2 hands with non-weapon hand techniques. So what I did when I wrote the book, I decided it's a training manual. That's it. It just teaches you how to do it. And it's full of photographs. That's a photograph on how to grip the cane. And what I did with my friend Luke, we decided rather than show pictures of us in our lounge in tracksuits, we would actually show a bit of respect to Barton Wright, and we would dress up in the costumes for a bit of fun. And I will show you some pictures, if I can find them now, from the book of Barton Wright. You have to bear with me a little bit. All right, well, here's on the top. That is Pierre Vinny. Pierre Vinny is that one. And that's him in the Bartitsu Club doing a demonstration. There he is. That below is Barton Wright. And that photograph is taken from is Pearson's magazine article, where walking stick self-defense. Now I can find some other pictures of Pierre Vinney, and then I'll show you there. Now here's some pictures of Pierre Vinney in live action, doing bayonet strikes left and right. He's surrounded by a crowd, and he jabs to the right, jabs to the left, and then the last picture, you can see him holding a stick up. So if you start there, whoops, on there, he's surrounded by a crowd. He jabs his stick to the right, jabs it to the left. So that's him in action, teaching his style. The book, if I sort of, all the moves. So me and my friend Luke, we got dressed up. You can see I'm the taller one.
Nice.
And we got in the costume. That's how to deal with someone striking. You step in, arm behind the back, break the arm.
You got also some movements like abanico to hit from up.
Some.
Do you have also some movements, some strikes like the abanico from Filipino martial arts?
No, we don't. And I'll talk about that now. I'll just show you, and I'll talk about the abanico. There you go. That's a two-handed butt strike to the throat. Those are different guards. That's a picture of Barton Wright from the magazine doing the double-handed head guard. And then, so basically, and then also I'm also referencing historical Canne pictures from various. So the whole book has got about 100 pictures in, and all the techniques are taught. So it's basically a training manual. There's a little bit of story about Barton Wright in the introduction and Sherlock Holmes, but then after that it goes through all the techniques, and I've got drills and exercises. Because what happened was I taught myself to do it, but by the end I'd learned how to do it. I seriously thought no one can go through this, because I had to use different sources, different books. I had to make notes. By the time I'd learned the system, I thought this is impossible. No one can learn this. And I literally have to write this down. I've got to write this down so that anyone else who wants to do it will know how to do it. Because what I've been through to learn this is ridiculous. I've done all these different books, all these different systems. I'm on all these Facebook groups asking questions. How does this work? How does that work? So by the time I got to the end of it, I thought, it's as a public service, I've got to write this down, because I was so in love with it, so obsessed with it, that I thought no one else is going to be able to go through this to learn this. It's just horrific. And even the Lang book, the H.G. Lang book, which was written in 1923, he writes it, he's English, but he writes it in a style that shows he's been in India a long time. There's he never uses the word the. Spin round head, move to front, head forward. It's almost impossible to understand what he's saying, very hard to understand. His whole book was all over the place. Nothing was in order. So that's why, when I did this book, I thought, well, what we'll do, let's get this all in a system. So we start off with the grip, the exercises, the guards, the cuts. So I go through, there's the, it's all done in a system so that you can go through it all. Now, abanicos, no. Now, I'll talk about the cuts in Bartitsu, because actually it's quite interesting. The abanico is that wrist movement. So the abanico is that sort of move, isn't it?
Yeah.
We don't have that. So in Bartitsu, there's basically only, in terms of cuts, in terms of swinging blows, there's that blow, which you practice with your moulinets. That's that cut. So that's a clockwise cut. There's an anti-clockwise cut. There's only two cuts. That one. And the other way, which you can do from there. So that's it. That one and that one. Now, if you want to strike lower in the body, you just lower yourself. You don't strike down. And the reason for that is after each cut, you cover your head. You go back to the head guard. You've always got to keep your head covered. So if you want to hit lower, you don't start doing that, because now you're leaving your head uncovered. So if you want to hit lower, you go lower. And then you come back up like that. So that's that cut. the horizontal, and then there's the vertical cut, which is like that. Now, the reason you do it this way is to get over someone's block. If you go to hit someone's head, they will tend to block like that, and your stick will hit their block. However, we do it in a different way. We go over, and the stick comes down, so it goes over the top of their block. So it goes, you go up on your tiptoes, you raise your whole body, and that goes over the top of the block. So you've got that vertical cut, horizontal cut, and then you've got the vertical cut, which goes that way, and then comes back up like that, back to guard. So you've got that moulinet, and you've got that moulinet, those two. And they're the only cuts. So your head cut is like that, and you come up under the jaw or strike the groin and back. So it's a vertical cut, a vertical plane, and a horizontal plane. So those are the basic cuts, really. This blow from here to the head, then to the groin, is kind of a vertical abanico, really.
Yeah, yeah.
You eventually build it up so you create this force field around you of whizzing wood. But that won't be so good in crowded area, you know. So that's when you've got space to be able to do it. When you haven't got space, you start going into two-handed styles, you know. And
Gary, I have one last question. I would like to know what do you see for the future of the Britain martial arts or stick arts? What do you hope for, especially?
Well, with Bartitsu, it seems to be becoming very popular. And I'm hoping my book, which was a result of a 2-year obsession, might be a factor in that, because now people have got something they can actually train from, which I didn't have, you know. But I think the Bartitsu is becoming very, very popular. I've got a Facebook group called Bartitsu, the Walking Stick Method of Self-Defense, and we have 27,000 members now. And
well, but I am not in it. You must invite me.
Oh yeah, you can join. You can join.
Okay.
The Walking Stick Method of Self-Defense.
Okay.
I'll have a look at your profile, see if I want you in. But if you get in, you'll get in. Don't worry.
For those who are following this podcast, there is all the description about Gary and his groups on Facebook, and I don't know if you have also an Instagram profile somewhere else.
No.
I'm the link to your book from Amazon, it will be in the description of this video.
That would be great. That would be great. And yes, and I think once you start, just keep practicing. I just loved it. And from before the lockdown, I didn't really know much about it. And now I'm totally obsessed, and I've started Facebook groups, and I'm training every day, and I just love it. I walk around with a walking stick, and yeah. And the other thing is, I use a crook cane. I'm going to show you actually.
Yeah.
This is my stick of choice. This is made of hickory, which is a very hard wood, and it's quite a small crook, so it doesn't get caught in your clothing or anything. So, but this is and hickory is one of the hardest woods. I've got this American wood, so this is my everyday carrying cane now. And yeah, no, I think the future is bright. I think more and more people are getting interested. And if you think in 1 year, I've got 27,000 members plus, it's growing all the time.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah, it is a lot. Yeah. And I think we've got Sherlock Holmes to thank for that, really.
Did you like the movies by Guy Ritchie?
Yes. Absolutely loved it. And actually, I should say,
do you think they caught the essence of Sherlock Holmes?
Well, there's actually two Sherlock Holmes. Actually, the very early Sherlock Holmes was totally unemotional and a bit, I suppose you'd say, like a high-functioning sociopath. Really, he was like a computer, no emotion. whereas the later version, as he came back, became a bit more emotional and a bit more human. So, and actually, did you know the laws of copyright? Due to the laws of copyright, the unemotional robotic Sherlock Holmes is out of copyright, but the emotional Sherlock Holmes is still in copyright because it's 70 years or something. So, and actually, I did want to tell you an interesting thing about Arthur Conan Doyle, actually, before we go, because he created the most logical and forensic detective ever created with Sherlock Holmes. And yet he himself was an absolute believer in all sorts of nonsense. He believed in, his wife was a spiritual medium who communicated with the dead. And there were two little girls in, I believe, in north of England, and they claimed to be talking to fairies in the garden. And they cut out these little pictures of fairies from a book, and they stuck them on flowers, and they became known as the Cottingdale Fairies. And Arthur Conan Doyle was so enchanted with this, he bought them a camera so that they could take pictures of these fairies. He completely believed, there were fairies in his bottom of his garden. And his wife was communicating with the dead. And quite famously, he ended up falling out with the great magician Houdini, because Houdini came over from America. And Houdini was, what he was, in the First World War, a lot of people died, you know, and there was a lot of people in America pretending to talk to the dead. And because of all the people that had died in the war, people were very gullible, and there were all these fake spiritual mediums. And Houdini started unmasking them all. And he ended up meeting Arthur Conan Doyle. And Arthur Conan Doyle's wife said, "I will communicate with your dead mother." And so Houdini, the arch skeptic, went to Arthur Conan Doyle's house. And Arthur Conan Doyle's wife communicated with Houdini's dead mother. And Houdini afterwards said, "Well, my mother spoke 5 different languages, mainly Yiddish, never spoke a word of English. So why my mother would be communicating to me in English, I really can't understand." And he was very rude about Arthur Conan Doyle's wife's ability. And so then it developed into a bit of a schism where they didn't talk to each other after that, because Houdini thought he was his wife was a fake. And so Houdini and Arthur Conan Doyle had a big falling out. But yeah, so but he did create that was the weird thing, though, the most scientific detective, and yet he believes in fairies in the garden. It's a strange thing, isn't it? You know.
And Gary, you started martial arts with Wing Chun.
Yes, Wing Chun.
Was it nice for you to see Sherlock Holmes performed by
yes. Well, who's
Robert Downey Jr., who's also a player, of a Wing Chun player?
Yes, that's very good, with the vertical fist and all that. Yes,
yeah.
That was quite. Yes, he's learning Wing Chun, isn't he? I've forgotten who his teacher was now, but yes, that was fun to see Sherlock Holmes doing Wing Chun. Absolutely, yes, and Bartitsu, of course. So yeah, that was great. Yeah, he's a great actor, Robert Downey Jr. Actually, he's fantastic.
Yeah,
and I saw the first time I saw him, he played Charlie Chaplin, the film about Charlie Chaplin. And he was so good.
I think it's his best movie. He's really exceptional in that movie.
Which one?
Charlie Chaplin.
Oh, unbelievable. What?
Also, he's also in Oppenheimer. We now everybody know Robert Downey Jr. because of Iron Man. He's a great Iron Man also, but yes. Charlie Chaplin, it's a real proof of acting.
Absolutely. It could have been Charlie Chaplin, couldn't it? I mean, it was just brilliant.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. Yeah. I've full kudos to him for that performance. Unbelievable performance. Yeah. So, to see him, Charlie Chaplin doing Wing Chun, well, there you go. We've made a complete circle.
Gary, I thank you for accepting my invitation. It was really a pleasure to talk with you and to know all these things that we didn't know about it.
Thank you very much indeed. I really enjoyed it. I was a bit worried about talking for an hour, but you've made it a pleasure.
I told you, it's the time flies.
Well, I'm only just warming up.
Okay.
Thank you very
Gary,
much indeed. It's been a pleasure meeting you.
again, you will find everything about Gary and his book in the description of this video. Thanks again for being with us. Still follow us in the future. Gary, thank you again.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.